Okay, so I'm just going to play this 3-minute video because it addresses the critical impediment, I guess, that's holding people who wish to do something that's going to bring about a freer, more just society. Yet, where they're stuck right now is sadly contributing to more of their pain and suffering. So I'll play the video and then we'll take it from there.
So, and I've heard a lot of people in the last few years say, "Don't vote, withhold your vote." Don't play a part in the system. Don't give them your support to continue the lies and the fraud and the corporate government and all this sort of stuff. Um, so the question, of course, that remains is if we don't vote, then other people will, and they will continue to bring in a fraudulent government in a fraudulent system, an illegal system. But where do people stand? Do we say if we don't vote, then a lot of good people their numbers won't count, and so therefore the people who are on the wrong side of history and the law, their vote will count because this system exists, and at least in the short term, they're going to continue to do what they've been doing. So I in my mind, I think we've got to turn up and play the game in order to try and influence what we can. In the meantime, we've got to be taking some kind of action to try and correct this illegality. So we have quite a minefield of things there. It's only a couple of weeks out from this election or fraud or whatever you want to call it. There's not a lot of time to fix this stuff up before that. And with the Voice, I know that there were quite a few people saying just abstain from voting, don't be a part of the system. However, Billboard Battalion was touring nationally at that time, and we were saying to people, do vote and vote no, because if the no voters don't turn up, it just leaves a fait accompli for the yes voters. And as it turned out, the AEC announced that the vote was lost. So we have a bit of a conundrum here. So what to do about that, I'm not 100% sure. I think, what are your thoughts? Do we leave it up to people, individuals, to say, I'm aware of this, but I've got to play the game a bit in order, and try and sway things, possibly get a heap of freedom candidates in, because I know many people throwing their weight or their hopes behind getting some of the Freedom Party, the Freedom candidates in, particularly in the Senate. So, just what are your thoughts about that minor technical setback?
Wow, excellent question. I'm so pleased you've asked it. So my first thought is that this just shot to mind, this quote from Hannah Arendt. Constant lying is not aimed at making the people believe a lie, but at ensuring that no one believes anything anymore. So what does it mean? It means keeping people in a state of confusion. A people that can no longer distinguish between truth and lies cannot distinguish between right and wrong. With such a people, you can do whatever you want. So you can even hear it in his way of trying to figure out what to do. It's like a real state of confusion, like it's constantly like this push-pull thing. Like there's this urgency to want to act now and do something that is going to give a sense of being powerful. And so that's the seduction of, well, if we don't join in, this voting process, well, that means it's only going to be left to those who don't actually care. And that means we're going to be subject to their will, the ones who just go along and accept what they're told. Where in reality, that's not how it works. The changes are going to be made that are going to strip you of your rights, regardless if you include yourself or not. So let's look at one of the first things that pops up, and that's the fear of what other people will do, because we're living in this fraudulent system, and they're going to be bringing in this fraudulent government. Well, you need to understand what that actually means. No matter who gets in, and you see him advocating for freedom politicians, like, you need to understand the purpose of politics and who created it. Politics is all about domination and control. So the idea that you can be a freedom politician, that's even a thing, is doublethink. It's actually having two opposing ideas and believing them to be solid and sound. You can't actually have that. So politics was invented by Satanists for the purpose of controlling people by stealth, but still controlling them. And until people understand that first, like, there's no chance that there's going to be any improvement, because no matter who gets in, and let's say it's all these people you love, while there's an imbalance where to be in parliament means you have immunity, that means you cannot be prosecuted for acts of immorality while in, let's call it office, not that it really is, but let's just call it that for the sake of it, then there's an imbalance of power. You are no longer living in a system of equity. You are living in a system of domination. So even the most well-intended people would find it too seductive not to use that level of imbalance. That's the issue, right? It's about understanding that. Is that how easy you find it in yourself when you know that you have power over someone else in a situation? How easy do you succumb to using that power? Well, it's usually force, not power. Using that force, knowing that there's going to be no immediate repercussions upon you for doing that. Well, that's the landscape that you'd be contributing to by saying, well, we can get our freedom politicians in there and they'll fix everything. No, they won't. They'll be seduced just like everyone else. Like, until there's accountability, until there's a society that truly understands how to self-govern and what that means, and what actual institutions have been subverted to keep us from that self-governing, until that's understood first and foremost, there's no reforming this, because you cannot reform something that's inherently designed to dominate and control. That's really, really critical to understand that. And so no matter how well-intended you are, if you indulge in the voting while you know that you're voting for criminals, then you are actually part of it, right? Because at the end of the day, when you choose the lesser of two evils, you're still choosing evil. So you can't fix evil. It's just evil. And so that's the confusion, right? There's that urgency of wanting to believe you have some kind of power by voting, where voting has never been about power. It's been about drawing your consent out of you without you knowing it, to being forcefully dominated and controlled by a parasitic ruling class that self-select, right, amongst themselves. That's all that is. So a freedom politician would just turn into one of those. If they start off with the best of intentions, it wouldn't matter, because there's no accountability. And that's the part that's missing for far too many people. So by abstaining from the whole voting, what you're doing is you're giving yourself more conditions to inspire you to start learning the truth and then speaking it out. Now, if you imagine that how many millions of people, came and showed up, let's say, to that rally in Canberra back in 22, I think it was. If every single one of those abstained from voting, then they got the fine, and then they actually activated upon that fine, for example, which is only $20. It's not really that scary, but that apparently is still an impediment for people to actually abstain from collaborating with their own enslavement. Like, that's the part that's quite surprising, actually. That a mere fine is enough to get people, to act under fear and comply and believe they actually can change a system from within, a system that's designed to enslave you, and that's its sole purpose. And that can now just be miraculously reformed without the consciousness of the people actually shifting. So if you imagine that's the case, that there's a million people, now a million people are motivated to actually start informing others of the true system that's meant to be in place, right? Where we self-govern through a jury of our peers. So knowledge of the true power of the jury is still held within a certain select number of people that you'll never find out who they are and why they're concealing it from you. But every so often, they release it because, I don't know, maybe they have to. It's part of their religion. And this guy, the High Court Justice, Sir Patrick Devlin, he actually published it. And this is just one small aspect of his publication. So it says the first object of any tyrant in Whitehall would be to make Parliament utterly subservient to his will, and the next to overthrow or diminish trial by jury. For no tyrant could afford to leave a subject's freedom in the hands of 12 of his countrymen. So it's right there. Like, they're not hiding it, but they do it in certain ways where most people are never going to find it or understand what it really means. Because when we hear trial by jury, we actually think jury trial. And that's the diminished version. That's the perversion, right? That's where you're just following orders from a judge, which is totally criminal to have a judge who's a servant of his masters in the legislature, which are just politicians. So now I need to go and give a bit of background as to how this was all subverted, right? Because if you don't understand it, you're going to keep thinking that there's a way to reform it. And so the correct system is that we elect people into office, not political parties, only individuals, right? And then once they take office, they are accountable to serve us. Now, how do you make sure they're accountable to serve you? You need to be the final scrutineer of the very things that are going to affect the quality of your life. So if legislation has some kind of weight of how it's going to organize society, if there is no lever of power to stand over that, then you effectively have gone from a service to violation, force, dominance. They no longer serve you, they dominate you. So the people who seek concentrated power understand this. That's why they took away trial by jury first, and they perverted it and made it like a jury trial. Right? So the first iteration of that was when qualifications were made, I don't know how many hundred years ago, on who could be a jury member, and the qualification was you had to be a male who had property. If you had property back then, you'd be like a feudal lord, right? So of course you're going to side with those people who are making the changes. So when you're on jury, you're just going to be judging based on a particular power that you're wanting to grab for yourself. Anyway, so it was slowly eroded, right? So by the time we incarnate into this reality, we have no idea about that. We've been totally programmed to believe that a judge has the actual authority to decide, and that the jury is to follow the orders of the judge, and they can only decide one small aspect, which is whether the defendant is guilty or innocent. That's a massive perversion, right? So people need to learn that part first. And if you don't go into the effort of learning that, which it's all there, the signals are showing you, then you are going to believe that you can just keep electing people and it's just electing the right people, where you're not understanding how people get corrupted quite quickly when there is no accountability. So if you understand how accountability works and how service really works, then you would never be voting, because there's no power in that. And think about it. Whenever you vote and there's legislation, does it ever get repealed in that time until a new party takes over, if they do it all? No, it never does. So where's your right of actually getting rid of criminal legislation? Where does that exist? The whole voting system has no structure for that. So people who put this system together originally knew that. They knew how tyranny would work if there wasn't power in the hands of the people. If something's going to affect you, why would you want to abdicate your right to actually say, no, that's not okay, I'm not agreeable to that? Why would you abdicate that? That's just real basic common sense. And this kind of knowledge has just been eradicated out of the consciousness. And so people like Wade, they don't have that knowledge, and they're not looking for that. So then they get in that state of confusion where they think, oh, well, if I don't do something, then we're going to get overrun, as opposed to actually, there's things I don't understand. So I probably need to start looking into what I don't know, because the truth is usually concealed in places you haven't looked. Now, I'm going to move into the police oath next, because it's really important to have clarity of mind about how the correct structure that we're supposed to be living under has been meticulously and covertly subverted over time, to make sure that people don't actually realize what they're consenting to when they actually cheer for a police force. So to recap, how it works is usually in trinities, you've got the legislature. Now that's been seized, right? So the levers of power that the people had in their hands to self-govern, that one was critical to take over, and that was through the political party system. Then, you need to go to work on the constabulary, because that's another critical aspect, because that's your enforcement arm, right? And so how would you do it? You would write in to the oath, and I'm not going to read the whole thing because I've done it before, but I'm just going to read out this bit. I will, to the best of my skill and knowledge, discharge all the duties thereof faithfully according to law. Now, how does that really work? You have the people believe that the law is legislation. Once they believe that, then anyone who comes into this position is going, well, legislation is law. So as long as I'm following legislation, which is law, then I'm doing my job correctly. The thing is that they recruit people who are of a lower IQ, who are not going to question with their moral compass. They're not going to do that. They're just going to be so keen to impress their cult masters that they'll do whatever. And, because there's a particular selection criteria, if you get through, you're going to be like, oh, I'm one of the privileged ones. I must have special qualities. So, that's a really good way to suck people in. And so they're not going to question what they're actually doing. Like, their morals will know something's off, but their, I guess their egos will override that. And then you need to be aware that the actual last check, the last bastion of freedom, had to be taken over beforehand, right? And that was the institution of trial by jury. And so you've got those three pillars, which is meant to be the separation of powers. That's the people form the legislature, the people form the judiciary, and the people form the constabulary. But when it's been subverted to actually serve a self-selecting ruling class, well, then you have all the power in your hands. So you've concentrated power. And if that isn't understood, then whatever you vote for without understanding this aspect of how the people are in charge through being the constabulary, not being a private corporation, that's why you're meant to take an oath to the people and be accountable. So if you're a public servant, no matter which role you play, you are always accountable, and that's through a jury of your peers, right? And if you're not accountable, which is what these criminal police are, they're unaccountable. That's why they get away with everything. And the legal system is designed to protect them, right? That's why they've created this idea of qualified immunity. If you seize that and have that as what people have learnt is what governance is, well, they just come to accept it because that's all they've ever known. And so if you're not educating people on the true system that their actual moral compass can immediately connect to once they get their ego out of the way, then you are just making sure that this is going to keep repeating. And so that's why I wanted to put the police oath in, just so you understand that when they say according to law, in their minds, these people who are of dimmer intelligence, their understanding law and legislation is the same thing. And you'll hear them say it all the time, but it's the law. But it's not. The real law is that of universal morality, which we are all part of and responsible for maintaining. And if we don't, we get karmic consequences. That's why the highest forms of PTSD come to those people who do the physical violating, which is the police and military. So the more that you keep engaging in this voting and believing that that gives you some kind of power and some kind of say, that you just have to find the right people, the more you're going to contribute to your slavery. So if you know that you're voting for something that's inherently designed to enslave you, then the karmic burden sits on your shoulders. So that's the way the universe works, is whatever you consent to by way of your actions is what you will get back in droves. It'll send that back to you until you learn your lesson, and it's going to keep doing it. So by activating through thinking you activate through voting, you actually are saying that you need to learn more lessons. You haven't suffered enough. That's what that's really saying. That's what you're inviting upon yourself. And so this is the clarity that these people don't have. They're so stuck in, I've got to fix something now. And, as opposed to what's the big picture? What am I supporting, right? By taking this short-term action? Am I not just compounding more of the same pain and suffering? And so how do I break from that rhythm? And that is you just stop participating. Now imagine what signal that would send. Regardless of what other people bring in, it's going to motivate people who haven't participated in a way they haven't been motivated before. So it requires that kind of vision to educate themselves in the true nature and then start speaking out. Imagine a million voices speaking out with the same message, that all of them have educated themselves on the true system. It would be unstoppable, because you'd be saying it to anyone that you came across, anytime you had dealings with people in the judiciary, the people who are the policy enforcement agents, right? The immoral order followers. Imagine day after day after day, people after people keep saying the same thing. Eventually, that weight would collapse the entire structure just by speaking it, right? Because it's a uniform message that can't be denied. You cannot deny the truth. It just requires enough people to get behind it. Okay, so if you've come to the point where you're actually ready to stand in your courage, to cease participating in your own enslavement through consenting, through voting, then here's a place for you to actually start learning what you need to learn so you can educate yourself and others. Okay, so we have a letter that's being constructed to send to the AEC Commissioner. So I'm going to show you how to find that here on the Magna Carta 1215 website. So you're going to come over here where it says action. You'll see a little drop down. Just click on action now, and that'll open up the whole page. As you can see, there's other campaigns in train. One is the police letter campaign. So below that, here we have it, the Australian elections. You just need to come here, download that, have a read, see what it does. If it inspires you like it has many others, it'll give you the confidence. That's what I've been hearing anyway, that you can face what's coming when you get threatened with a fine, when you choose to abstain from showing up to those ballot boxes. And so it's been constructed in a way that speaks the truth of how life really works and the consequences for those who choose to be violators of people's freedom. And so that's what we need. We need more people with that courage to speak the truth, how it works in reality. And eventually the weight of more and more people speaking that truth brings so much force that it becomes undeniable. And that's when the cracks start to appear, because you can't fool people when they know the truth, right? No matter what tactics they try. And so this is where panic sets into their structure, because they're just conscious beings like you and I. So we need to speak to their consciousness. And that's what this letter is designed to do. And so just going to show you the other campaigns that are part of this page. If you're interested, there's one to the 3 pillars that control us all. That's the judiciary, the police, and the council. And there's also questions to those very individuals if you want to confront them face to face, or if you want to write to them. So you've got that as well. You've got the notices. So that's when you're collecting evidence. This is how to create a file of evidence for anyone who's coming against you and violating your rights, whether they be in the name of government or a third-party interloper that's acting with the force of government behind them. You've got the Learn tab. So there's videos, there's reading, there's Act versus Charter, the 12 presumptions of the fake court. You've got definitions, frequently asked questions and answers, and the full transcript. So lots of value there. You've got news and articles as well. So like I said, there's a ton of stuff to get involved in. Just take it at your own pace. You've got memes if you want to send out seeds into people's consciousness. Social proof, video evidence of people who have stood directly in front of these enforcers of immorality, and you can see the outcomes of that. You've got a way to see what communities are showing up that are acting in alignment with the actual law. And if you're interested, you can make contact, and you may want to start up your own community. And if you do, you'll get handed a kit, and then you can also subscribe. So that's all I wanted to show you.